Yeah, exactly. Far out. Good morning, everybody. Welcome back. Joe, just give me a thumbs up when we're live on Facebook. All right, we are live on Facebook, so good morning to you guys out there in virtual reality. This is just another version of virtual reality as we're going to discover more in depth today. But welcome to everyone joining us in this space. It's good to be with you once again to have these mind-expanding conversations that I hope really bear fruit in your life by giving you access to more of who you really are. And as we'll see today in greater detail, who you really are is the all and everything. That's the foundation upon which we start the conversation. Because what we've realized through these esoteric teachings that have been with us on the planet for millennia is that we were created by an eternal loving source, is basically the leitmotif within all of these traditions, whether it's, the Tathagata Garbha of Buddhism, where you have the Buddha seed within you, or Christ consciousness, or you are the expression of the Tao and the power of the Tao. You are the Atman, and Atman is Brahman. I mean, you have this reality continually repeating itself in different symbols at different times and different cultures. But in truth, what it's saying is basically you in reality are the same being, and there's no two-ness in reality. Advaita, no two-ness, non-dual. And so the one listening right now comes from the womb of eternity and is a product of the womb of eternity, and therefore has all of the attributes of the eternal infinite. And what we've gone into is a kind of sleep, as Gurdjieff liked to refer to it, this sleep of limitation. And what we're going to be exploring today in various ways through the teachings of Hinduism, primarily through the Tantric tradition, the non-dual Shaiva teachings of India, also through the Kriya Yoga traditions of Sri Yukteswar in his book, The Holy Science, as well as the Sufi tradition. We're going to see how this idea that you are an eternal being that has fallen asleep in matter or the physical experience. And this theme has been conceptualized and made very concise as involution, evolution. So the involution part is you are the eternal infinite, and you literally involve yourself into increasing degrees of limitation until you come to the density of matter and physicality. And so now the spirit of the infinite that you are is totally involved and limited into the workings of the physical cosmos and the biological vehicle that you call your body. Now, through the process of spiritual teaching and development, you evolve. So you begin to evolve through the different stages, and if you know anything about the 7 levels or the chakra system, you can see that this evolution has a trajectory from dense matter at the base of the spine. Then you move into the biological expression of life emerging at the 2nd chakra, then the mental or lower mental vehicle of egoic consciousness at the Manipura or solar plexus chakra. And then you go transpersonal into the heart chakra, where you begin to recognize the unity behind appearances, and compassion becomes your operating system because you realize there's just one self. There's really just one being in a multitude of forms. You've gone transpersonal. You've gotten out of the limitations of the egoic thinking. And that's really, I think, where we are. We're on the cusp of that, culturally and sociologically speaking. And that's why I think we're encountering such evolutionary pressures right now, that we're seeing that the old egoic paradigms of control, totalitarianism, which is just egomaniacal behavior, all of that is emerging. And what was once hidden and kept under the wraps of very nice names like democracy and big business, we're starting to actually see through that. And as a result, we're going to be pressured to let go of these old paradigms that are no longer working and actually hindering the transpersonal revolution into the compassionate heart of a shared humanity. So this is why the calling is to each one of us to open that hidden doorway that goes beyond your egoic personality and more back or back into an expression of yourself as a spiritual being having a human experience. And so that's why it's so crucial that each one of us realize that this is all an invitation that is immediately and directly coming to each one of us from our future self, if you will, or our eternal self. So as we move up the ladder or spectrum of consciousness, we go into the next phase at the throat chakra, which is where we really take our power back. So not only do we recognize the unity behind the diversity, and we see it's one being in many disguises, but we also have the creative word, the Devar Hashem, the mantra, right, the Vak, all of these expressions from the ancient tongues basically saying that you have the power of manifestation. You're a magical being. You can use words of power and higher thought forms to manifest your reality consciously, right? So when we go here, we are in a place of really working with our recognition that we are projecting the entire universe based on our belief system, the words we speak, the thoughts we think. It's all emanating from us. That's the big aha. When we were down here at the third level of egoic thinking, it all looked like it was coming at us, and we were the effect of a very big world that was outside and separate from our internal state. As we go up the ladder and we begin to radiate into greater fields of intelligence and understanding, we actually begin to encompass what we're seeing. You see? And so what we realize then is reality is emanating or projecting from us like a hologram. So that's why Jesus in the Gospels will say, like, be careful what you think, be careful what you say. Not because you're a good girl or a bad girl and the bearded guy in the sky is going to zap you if you say or think the wrong thing. You'll just manifest suffering for yourself. So be careful because you don't realize the power that you've always had. So as we take the power back, we begin to realize that we are not victims of the world we see. And these old and worn out paradigms of greed and corruption and consumption that are killing the planet and subjugating billions of people for the pleasure and enjoyment of very few who rig the game is no longer going to be what we want. And we're going to take our power back. And we're going to manifest a different paradigm that is all-inclusive, where everyone is honored as an expression of divinity. And then that begins to open up the vision of what is beyond all of the elements. You see, what we've looked at so far, earth, water, fire, air, space, or akasha, is here. There's a part of you that has been involved in what the tantric teachings call the Mahabhutas, the great elements, the Panchatattvas, the 5 elements. There's a part of you that is beyond all elements. So whatever you perceive or conceive isn't you. You're not an object. You're not a thing. You're not an image. You can take form, but it ain't you. That's part of going to sleep. We thought we were these mental bodies, astral bodies, physical bodies. But when we start to evolve back, we realize that there is an eye-opening experience, literally. The Agna Chakra, the third eye, the 6th center, opens us to the vision of God consciousness, which is beyond all name and form. And we are a direct and immediate expression of that eternally. We remember our ancient name. We remember who we were before time and space ever existed. This is being made more and more available to us. And when we have that vision, which isn't just a concept, it's actually where you're outside, beyond the field of all limitation, you actually can move and change everything. You're like Neo out of the Matrix. You're the one. So that is important to recognize, because if you're familiar with the work of David Hawkins, he calibrated all of these levels, right, in his spectrum of consciousness. And when we get to this third eye level, remember his scale went from like 20 or 30, which was shame and guilt, very low frequency consciousness, to total enlightenment at 1,000, where he said Buddha, Krishna, Jesus are, representatives of this 1,000 peak experience. When we go to what Hawkins termed the level of 750, he says you get to a place where he said he experienced it firsthand, where you realize you could feel the trace of all of the enlightened masters that have come before you at this stage or this level of opening. And you can also realize those who have gone beyond. So from the 6th into the 7th, where you are a servant, you are a child of God, you are a son of the Buddha or a daughter of the Buddha. You recognize what is beyond as what you serve. You've surrendered to what is beyond even your divine self. And Hawkins says you're given a choice at 750 to either surrender and go beyond even yourself as this enlightened being that is beyond the elements, that can control the elements, that can influence other people that are not out of the matrix yet. Like, there's a temptation, there's a seduction to do that. And that's why Hawkins would say in this talk that you'll see a lot of these gurus that fall into the trap of that temptation, because they do have cities or powers that can work at these higher frequencies, and people get into guru worship and they take power onto themselves, and they can play with your subtle energies, they can manifest things, they can give you Shaktipat or the touches of grace, and all of that feels really real and electrifying to people who are down below. But they're also misusing their power because they haven't surrendered it. And you see a lot of that stuff that goes, gurus gone wild kind of thing, I don't even know why I'm talking about all this. I had nothing to do with my message this morning, but it does in a way. So what you're looking at then is going to a place of really flowering, where you recognize the one that is beyond all, and you serve and surrender to that. And so we are at a place where, wherever we are on the spectrum, we want the whole story, right? Because that gives us an ability to navigate. If we don't know the whole story, if we don't have a really accurate map, we're going to get lost. And remember, the map's not the territory, but a map is really necessary if you plan on reaching your destination in one piece, right? So I brought a few maps along with me this morning. And one of them is The Holy Science. I don't know, anybody familiar with this book? Sri Yukteswar was Paramahamsa Yogananda's guru, and if you know anything about Yogananda, he's the author of Autobiography of a Yogi. And Yukteswar, a great being. I mean, you can read Yogananda's autobiography and get a sense of what Yukteswar was capable of. Definitely a man of miracles and occult power through his practices of yoga. But what came about in the authoring of this little book was that Yukteswar went to the Kumbh Mela in India, which happens every few years, and literally millions of people go to this event, and it changes location in 4 different areas, but comes back around in each location every few years. Well, at this Kumbh Mela festival that goes on for several days, all of the great masters actually come down from the Himalayas and they come up from South India and they make themselves known so that they can bestow blessing upon people. Well, Yukteswar tells the story that when he was at the Kumbh Mela, the Mahavatar Babaji, who's the immortal yogi that, Paramahamsa Yogananda talks about, Babaji interacts with Yukteswar at the Kumbh Mela. Did you get all that? And basically says, you got to write something for the people of the West so that they can understand and start to get a feeling for the map, a really accurate map. And so he calls it the holy science. And what he does, says it all in the outset of the opening of the book. He says, the purpose of this book is to show as clearly as possible that there is an essential unity in all religions, that there is no difference in the truths inculcated by the various faiths, that there is but one method by which the world, both external and internal, has evolved, and that there is but one goal admitted by all scriptures. But this basic truth is one not easily comprehended. The discord existing between the different religions and the ignorance of men make it almost impossible to lift the veil and have a look at this grand verity. The creeds foster a spirit of hostility and dissension. Ignorance widens the gulf that separates one creed from another. Only a few specially gifted persons can rise superior to the influence of their professed creeds and find an absolute unanimity in the truths propagated by all faiths. So this was written in the late 1800s. You had the movement of New Thought coming in right around that time. And so what he just said about it's difficult and only exceptional people can find the unity behind all religions, well, the Unity Church and other offshoots of New Thought began to actually crop up. So we're in this space as having a legacy that has gone before us that actually is focused on the one goal, and no longer is it my religion versus your religion within these New Thought or higher understanding denominations or churches. It's to recognize the unity and then actualize it in yourself for the betterment of all, right? A very different approach than a membership society where your ethnicity or your mythological membership grants you access because you got your your free pass to the higher world when you die. It's a very different approach. And it's another mark of this change in atmosphere. And this is where I want to go to next, but I want to take a breath because I want all of this to really matter and make sense to you. So if I just keep rattling on, it's not going to really land because we're going to be caught in a buzz of foreign ideas. So just be here now, if you will. Take a breath. We're going to go into the next phase of our talk. Find that quiet and that stillness within the heart. Recalibrate your understanding as you sensitize to inner space. And recognize that there is a living presence, a guide that is ready to meet us. And he says it beautifully in A Course in Miracles. He says, your will is your teacher. And if you're willing to make contact with the Holy Spirit now, with your guru or your guide, nothing can stop that or prevent that or block that. And so we call in the presence of grace in whatever form is skillful, or formlessness, if that's your flavor. And we thank you for this guidance. We thank you for making yourself and ourself revealed to us this morning. You'll see why I took that pause at this juncture in our conversation. Because Yukteswar was a master astrologer in Vedic astrology, or Jyotish. And what Yukteswar did in this little book was revolutionize the teaching around the ages, or yugas, in Vedic science. And what Yukteswar said is that we go through a grand cycle of 24,000 years. And what that grand cycle means is that we are orbiting the center of the universe, which is emitting magnetic energy and subtle energies that actually influence all matter, all particles, all beings, all planets, all suns. And in these orbits or revolutions around the center of all things, we get further away at times in the cycle, and we get closer at other times within the cycles. And so these ages are 4 in number. The Kriya Yuga, the Kali Yuga, let's say this, the Kali Yuga is the dark age. And that is when spiritual understanding hits rock bottom, and all we identify with is the material body. We become completely blocked from our higher heritage. We go up the scale, we go into Dwapara Yuga, and as Yukteswar says, we go from knowing ourselves as physical bodies, and then we begin to know ourselves as mental beings. And what is interesting about the way Yukteswar lays this out is that our whole social experience changes with each yuga. So according to his timeline, at the Kali Yuga, we're only using material tools, the ox, the cart, hoes, and swords, and astrolabes or what have you, just material stuff. When you go into a new yuga, new technology emerges. So the steam engine, and then you go into even higher expressions of that yuga where you start to use electricities, so telephones, lights, etc. These are all marks of changing yugas or ages. Now we're going into Ethernet, non-local fields, cell phones, satellites. We've gone into another stage of unfoldment. And what Yukteswar is saying is because we're coming back around, and the magnetic virtue that is emanating from the center of all things is impacting us and morphing or changing or transmuting us at a cellular consciousness level. We're waking up. We're becoming, we're evolving into the transpersonal. Is this clear? So listen to this, because he gives some really interesting things. If you're into like the hidden history and lost civilizations branch of things, this is fascinating stuff, because his timeline is exactly how these theorists and researchers have dated the end of the last age. So at around 11,000 BC, we get this from Plato, we get this from the teachings of the Mahabharata, we get this from the Sumerian and Egyptian legends. Around 11,000 BC, they even dated the Sphinx with its astrological alignments. Graham Hancock, Robert Bauval dated these monuments at 11,000 BC. The Sphinx, if you're curious, I have to go on these side notes, I'm such a geek sometimes. The Sphinx has water erosion on it. Not wind and sand, but water erosion, which means that the Sphinx was built when Egypt was subtropical. And it was aligned to the constellation of Leo, which is the lion. The Sphinx is a lion body, right? That was in its precessional equinoctial alignment 11,500 years ago. And what Yukteswar is saying is, from 11,500 BC, the sun began to move away from the point of its orbit nearest to the grand center toward the point farthest from it. Accordingly, the intellectual power of man began to diminish. When the Egyptians built the Sphinx and the Osirian temple that is in the Giza complex, they were moving blocks of granite that were 70 tons. And they were putting them on the lintel of the entryway of the Osirian temple. We can't do that today with our cranes. 70-ton blocks. And so there's this whole occult history that they had access to sound technology that can levitate things. Their intellectual capacity at the Atlantean time, pre-Egypt, pre-sand Egypt, as Gurdjieff calls it, was far in advance than what we have, right? So that's when we began to move away. That was the Ice Age. That was the great cataclysm of the flood, when all of this higher civilization got wiped out. Atlantis went down into the depths of the oceans. Then he says, during the 4,800 years which the sun took to pass through one of the Satya ages, the intellect of man lost altogether the power of grasping spiritual knowledge. So we keep declining, right? And then we go into the intellect gradually lost all power of grasping the knowledge of divine magnetism. And then the human intellect lost its power of grasping the knowledge of electricities and their attributes. And then finally, at the end of this, at the dregs of the yugas, the intellectual power of human beings was so much diminished that it could no longer comprehend anything beyond the gross material of creation. And he dates this at around 500 of the Common Era. And if you know your timeline in history, that is the beginning of the Dark Ages, so-called. AD 500 is the beginning of literally the Dark Age, or Kali Yuga. Now, Yukteswar is far more hopeful in his way of understanding the yugas, because in the more traditional teachings of India, the Kali Yuga lasts for 432,000 years, and we're only into the 5,000th year of this 432,000 years. So we would have to go through a long slog. Yukteswar doesn't have that timeline. He's saying we've come up already from the Dark Ages, and we're entering into this radical transformation, okay? Which means that we're going to be mutated. You know, Hollywood has this unconscious understanding, even if their execution is sometimes way off. The themes that they are giving to the popular mind are very telling. Superhero movies and mutant movies are happening quite rapidly now. Movies where you're transcending nature, you're overcoming, the physical limitations, time travel, etc. That's really become seeded within the popular imagination. And it's because there is this universal call, if you will, that we must undergo mutation. We must develop and access a different organ sensorium that's going to have us wake up to this transpersonal reality and ourselves as beings that are beyond physical, biological limitations, okay? And on that note, you probably know this book, The Field, by Lynn McTaggart. This is the hard science part of what we're talking about today. And I can't go into the depth that I would like to in this book this morning, but there are a few things I wanted to pull out that will give you some anchoring and another nice way of orientating on this map that we're building here this morning. You with me? So she gives the definition of a field. And she says, simply put, a field is a region of influence. And everything has fields. Your cells have fields. Atoms have fields. The chair has a field. Plants have fields. So we're dealing with fields within fields within fields, right? There are many ways that fields are operating and manifesting. She says that there is the 0 point field, right? This is the ground of being that Meister Eckhart talked about 800 years ago. The 0 point field is a repository of all fields and all ground energy states and all virtual particles. It is a field of fields. So everything emanates from the quantum vacuum or the 0 point energy field. We're swimming in it right now. And every electron that makes up every object that we're perceiving, including the electrons that we're perceiving with, these electrons, upon closer examination, are not physical particles. They're ghost-like. And this is what's making up the very fabric of everything we think is real and solid, are these subatomic particles. And what they've looked at when they look at an electron is it flashes, it's a pixelated entity. So it's coming in and going out of existence so rapidly that our nervous system doesn't compute the pixelation. So the electron is going into the void and then remanifesting in picoseconds, Planck seconds. You can't detect it. But you're literally disappearing and reappearing. You're going back into the void and then back into manifestation faster than your nervous system can compute. And good thing, because we'd all go insane if we weren't prepared to experience that. Hence the gradual evolution. You still with me? What this means is you're an infinite being having a human experience. And you can never not be you. In fact, the you is even beyond the 0 point field. The 0 point field is what you're using. It's called Maya. It's the magic that you're using to project yourself into manifestation, along with the chairs and everything else. So when we begin to access this field again through our spiritual development, we enter true abundant life, right? You will know the truth will set you free. And I have come to give you life abundant. And just a quick aside here, in the Gospel of John where this is said, in the Greek, he's making a distinction between life with the Greek word bios, biology. He's saying, I haven't come to give you more bios. You're already in bios. I've come to give you Zoe. It's a higher order of life. It's eternal life. It's you as the being of light that is in an infinite playground of infinite possibility. You just got involved with the drama of being separate. Now you're evolving out of the drama of limitation. So just a little bit more on this field, and then we're going to move on to the last phase of our conversation. But if you add up all the particles of all varieties in the universe constantly popping in and out of being, you come up with a vast, inexhaustible energy source equal to or greater than the energy density in an atomic nucleus, all sitting there unobtrusively in the background of the empty space around us. Like one all-pervasive, supercharged backdrop. This is what Nikola Tesla discovered. He had the ability of free energy, 150 years ago. He recognized this zero-point field. It has been calculated that the total energy of the zero-point field exceeds all energy in matter by a factor of 10 to the power of 40, or 1 followed by 40 zeros. So in other words, abundant life. No lack, no scarcity, no hunger, no homelessness, no suffering. When you come out of the drama of being separate as this imprisoned little ego, and you begin to move with compassion, you open yourself back up to the field and to your natural inheritance. And then manifestation through the power of your word and your thought will become accessible. You'll know you're the magician, not the fool. This is another interesting little factoid about the zero-point field. The existence of the zero-point field implies that all matter in the universe is interconnected by waves, which are spread out through time and space, and can carry on to infinity, tying one part of the universe to every other part. The idea of the field might just offer a scientific explanation for many metaphysical notions, such as the Chinese belief in the life force, or qi, described in ancient texts as something akin to an energy field. It even echoes the Old Testament account of God's first dictum, "Let there be light," out of which matter is created. In other words, the zero-point field accounts for the stability in all creation. And then the last thing I want to mention here is to get ourselves stabilized and aligned with our power source, and to know ourselves as abundant life manifesting. We have to get into phase. We've talked about this a little bit when we mentioned Dr. Emoto's experiments in water, where when you start to really use thought form technology and words of power, they actually have impact on the molecular structure of matter, energy. And when you're using high frequency divine thoughts, you are literally imprinting sacred geometry on your body and on the objects and people around you. And when you're in these sacred geometrical phases, you're aligning to greater and greater fields that will give you access to God's mind. Because God thinks geometrically, as Plato liked to say. God gave deep structures, if you will, to every scale of creation. That's why we see the Fibonacci spiral happening everywhere, from fetal development to galaxies and their spiral arms. Everything is manifesting in these sacred geometrical expressions of God's mind, God's language, God's thoughts. When we begin to mirror God's mind, God's language, and God's thoughts, we literally create the Merkaba, or the vehicle of sacred geometry that coheres that gets into phase with these higher and higher fields of information and energy. And then we can bring in more light, more knowledge, more love, more peace. You still with me? So one of the most important aspects of waves is that they are encoders and carriers of information. When two waves are in phase and overlap each other, technically called interference, the combined amplitude of the waves is greater than each individual amplitude. So in other words, when I ask you, are you with me? Are we in phase? Are your wave functions in the interference pattern of my wave functions? Are we attuning? Are we communing? And if that's the case, then our sine waves are going in the same amplitude and the same patterns. And we actually increase the power of the field that's generated. And that impacts every molecule, every atom, every entity, everywhere, every when in the quantum universe. We could actually change the structures of society. They've done this experiment with transcendental meditation. When a group of 20 people prayed together with a common agenda or goal, crime went down in the cities that they were praying for 20% at the time that they were praying. So when we cohere, when we are in phase, that's the whole point of the church as an entity. We're identifying as our sacred self. And then we strengthen one another. We edify the brethren. Again, I'll pause. We're going into our final station here, or maybe the near final station. Take a moment, settle into the breath, settle into the heart. And even if your conscious mind and your intellect are not grasping everything that's being said, don't block it with the doubts and the belief that you're not understanding it or getting it, but let the transmission of the energy and the information that's being emitted go into you deeply. Don't block it. Soften your forehead. Open your heart. Become porous and malleable. And you'll notice that there's a deeper you that is naturally going to get into phase with this. It may not be the you that you think you are, but that's the whole point of your sadhana, your spiritual practice, is to rediscover the lost you. Again, we give thanks to the teacher of teachers who is guiding us into all truth. May we continue absorbing and assimilating this information. May it be used to bear fruit in our life. Spiritual fruit, joy, wisdom, trust in the greater hand that is moving all things. May we come to realize that we are safe, we are protected, we are whole, and happiness is our inheritance. May we realize that we are loved with an infinite love, here and now. So this book is Idris Shah's The Sufis. And his approach in this book is to basically say that Sufism isn't Islamic. Sufism uses the vehicle of the religion of Islam, just like Sufism can use the vehicle of Buddhism, or Christianity, or Hinduism, or Taoism. Sufism is the inner essence that is designed to cultivate your deeper self and give you access to the field. That's why in Sufism, they actually talk a lot about, and Rumi mentions this quite often in his poems, that you become a swimmer. That's one of the technical terms of a Sufi, is a swimmer. You're swimming in the oceanic field of frequencies, the 0 point field. That's where you are playing. That's why there are stories of Sufis appearing and disappearing before the eyes of their disciples, manifesting things at will, knowing what's going on far away as if it were there, biolocating. All of that becomes possible when you understand the nature of the field and its potentiality. So Sufism is that hidden core of all religions that has you becoming Christ-like, awake, Buddha, so that you overcome ignorance and remember your infinite potentiality, and you become near to God. So that's why he says the Arab mystics were anciently known as the near ones, Mukaribun, who believed that essentially there was a unity among the inner teachings of all faiths. Like John the Baptist, they wore camel's wool and may have been known as Sufis, people of wool. And then he says the secret lore and practice of Christians, Zoroastrians, Hebrews, Hindus, Buddhists, and the rest have been bridged within these hidden or inner teachings. This process, the confluence of essences, has never been grasped by non-Sufis as a reality, because such observers find it impossible to realize that the Sufi sees and contacts the Sufic stream in every culture, as a bee will suck from many flowers without becoming a flower. So without becoming a Christian, without becoming a Jew, without becoming a Buddhist, you're taking the honey as the Sufi. You're taking the essence of the flower. You're coming back to know the holy science, which is the unity within all religions. Sufi mysticism differs tremendously from other cults claiming to be mystical. Formal religion is for the Sufi merely a shell. The Sufi uses religion and psychology to pass beyond all this. Having done so, he returns to the world to guide others on the way. Sufis believe that, expressed in one way, humanity is evolving to a certain destiny. We are all taking part in that evolution. Now listen. Organs come into being as a result of the need for specific organs or senses. The human being's organism is producing a new complex of organs in response to such a need. We're being mutated. In this age of the transcending of time and space, the complex of organs is concerned with the transcending of time and space. What ordinary people regard as sporadic and occasional bursts of telepathic or prophetic power are seen by the Sufi as nothing less than the first stirrings of these organs. The difference between all evolution up to date and the present need for evolution is that for the past 10,000 years or so, we have been given the possibility of a conscious evolution. So essential is this more rarefied evolution that our future depends on it. Do you see the pressures? Right? If we don't change, we'll die, or we'll go into a global tyranny. One or the other. So essential is this more rarefied evolution that our future depends on it. It can be called learning how to swim. Now, he tells a story at the outset of this book that I wish we can go into in more detail, if you're still with me on this. It's a fable about how an advanced society that had access to the highest levels of divine consciousness realized that they were going to go into a cycle of decline. They were going to move away from the dharmic virtue of the great central sun and begin to shut down these inner organs or senses that can navigate and know the hidden field. And so there was a move to preserve this heritage, right? The secret doctrine. It went underground. It was preserved. And over time, as the centuries kept moving forward, he says in the story that there came a man who had been found for the time being lacking in the necessary qualities and rebelled against this order and managed to develop a masterly idea. He would merely offer to take away the burden of thinking that you had to get back to your spiritual source by saying there was no burden. And what Idris Shah is saying within the Sufi story is that's what happened when we had our scientific revolution. We went into materialism. Now we're not spiritual beings having a human experience. We're just bio-entities that are going back into the dust, and that's it. We have no future state. We're just complicated machines or talking monkeys. And so he says that as a result of this, people began to doubt whether there was such a thing as learning how to swim. And everything that was being held on to by these great master teachers was now rejected. A new gospel was welcomed on all sides as one of liberation. Man had discovered that he was already mature. He felt, for the time at least, as if he had been released from responsibility. Right? Eat, drink, and be merry. Now, I don't have any more time, but to say this. In this new gospel, as he calls it, of materialism, where we forget our spiritual heritage and we go to sleep as biological beings completely, as a society and culture, where at this stage, everything looks like a giant mall. We're not building Notre Dame. We're not building the Great Pyramids. We're building malls. It's all just so shallow and empty. Our culture has gone into a huge decline within this materialism and the scientism that seems to back it up. That's why he says in this new gospel, to build a ship is to cultivate this inner life so that you can, remember, create that Merkava, that chariot, that body of light that would actually have you voyage into your infinite self. So that's what the Sufis call building the ship. Now, in this new gospel of materialism, he says that they've come up with all of these, terms now in this dictionary within this materialistic age. And of course, it's tongue-in-cheek. But look what he says. Ship in the dictionary means displeasing. An imaginary vehicle in which impostors and deceivers have claimed it possible to cross the water, now scientifically established as an absurdity. No materials impermeable to water are known on this island from which a ship might be constructed, quite apart from the question of there being a destination beyond the island. Preaching shipbuilding is a major crime under the law 17 of the Penal Code, subsection J, the protection of the credulous. Shipbuilding mania is an extreme form of mental escapism, a symptom of maladjustment. All citizens are under a constitutional obligation to notify the health authorities if they suspect the existence of this tragic condition in any individual. And then the other entry he gives here is swimming, unpleasant. Supposedly a method of propelling the body through water without drowning, generally for the purpose of reaching a place outside the island. The student of this unpleasant art had to submit himself to a grotesque ritual. In the first lesson, he had to prostrate himself on the ground and move his arms and legs in response to the commands of an instructor. The entire concept is based upon the desire of the self-styled instructors to dominate the credulous or simple-minded in barbaric times. More recently, the cult has taken the form of epidemic mania. So this is the clash of ages. This is the old paradigm that had completely denied and subjugated the belief system of this more ancient paradigm. And now we're having what Terence McKenna called an archaic revival. We're reconnecting to these ancient esoteric traditions, and for those of us who are ready, we'll build our ship and create a different reality. So, blue bag's going to go around. And if you're joining us on Facebook, you can find the link there below in the comments section. Please click on it, and you can also let us know that it's for the 8 a.m. service. And thank you. The church and I are very grateful for your offerings. If anybody has any feedback, Joe has a mic for you so everybody can hear you online. Don't be shy. Let's bless the offering. We are grateful for the gifts and the givers, and we ask that all be blessed in this field of infinite prosperity and the manifestation of true love and true wisdom on this planet. And so it is. Amen. Anyone? Anyone? We have a hand here, Joe.
I have a question, actually. Okay. When you were talking about the field, I have been studying the Heart Sutra
Very good.
and emptiness, and it's suddenly as if something just opened up in my mind that is what you're describing.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. And what I like to point out in the Heart Sutra is that it's Avalokiteshvara, the bodhisattva of compassion, who realizes that form and emptiness are the same. And what that means to me, anyway, is that you can only enter the realization of the field when you open up universal compassion. So that's the ticket, that's the key to that hidden door. is us becoming universally compassionate. That's how the revolution will really happen. So,
And there is no wisdom without the compassion.
that's
what
right. Thank
you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for mentioning that. We have 30 seconds or so. Yes, Christine?
Question for 30 seconds. But,
A minute?
you know, with Christ saying, resist not evil, when you were talking about being in the, you know, that makes so much sense with that. That to resist evil, you're not going to be.
Yeah, it's not to say that you're going to fight evil, but you're going to deny the existence of evil. When you're in phase with reality, evil appears as an empty or non-existent expression of an insane mind. So when you're aligned with sanity, it's not that you're going to give in to evil, you'll actually shine it away. It won't have an effect on you. So that it's an important part. When we say resist not evil, it doesn't mean become subjugated to a tyrant or a crazy person or stay in an abusive relationship.
But bombs and tanks and everything aren't the ideal answer to that effect. It's probably, you know, getting like this with the cause
Yeah,
of it.
yeah, and those bombs and those tanks can only exist because we elect people who aid the manufacturing of bombs and tanks. If we wake up with wisdom and compassion, we're not going to elect sociopaths and psychopaths who just keep making money on war under the guise of helping people.
And also, I think that the authoritarian person to then have the compassion of acknowledging the Christ within is much more positive than any other, you know, way of dealing with it.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
in other
you'll
words-
undergo a radical transformation of how you know yourself.
Right. I mean, it will change everything.
Everything. Okay? So let's stand, close out. Just want to thank everybody joining us on Facebook, and of course to everyone here for going on this journey this morning. We just want to recognize that we are sealing this practice in gratitude to the universal teacher of compassion who is guiding us into all truth. May whatever was said here this morning that is in alignment with truth be remembered and integrated into our lives. Whatever was said that was out of phase with universal truth, may it be forgotten and never remembered. And in this great remembering and this evolution back to who we are, we know that the light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. And the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is. Amen. Course in Miracles tomorrow night, 7:15 in the classroom. Join us. Namaste, everybody. Thank you so much.